Hello, this is Christina Simmons with the Say Yes to Holiness podcast, and thank you so much for joining me today as I have a really special guest who I think you all are going to enjoy, but maybe not for the reasons you might expect. So, Jesse, I welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and what it is that you are doing and where you are.
My name is Jesse Weiler, and I am the director of the Liturgical Institute in Mundelein, Illinois, which is a part of the University of St. Mary the Lake of the Archdiocese of Chicago.
Awesome. Actually, one of our priests from the Diocese of Birmingham, where I'm located, Father Justin Ward, he actually went up and he spent time with you all, and we're blessed to have him as our diocesan, head of our liturgy and worship office. So the work that you guys are doing, though, isn't just for priests and or religious, and it's important for us to realize that. But before we get into that, would you mind sharing a little bit about your own faith journey and how it is that you came to be doing what you're doing today?
Very convoluted way of getting where I am today, and I started born and raised Catholic from the western suburbs of Chicago, and went to Catholic school my whole life. Grade school, high school, college. In college, I studied video production and film with a minor in theater. So I really kind of liked the arts and film and things like that. I at one point was going to work for news stations, but I interned at ABC News in Milwaukee, and I absolutely hated it, and I didn't like the way that everything was driven by ad money and revenue and things like that, and so that was kind of eye-opening for me. And so then I moved back towards video production. And then after college, I did a year of service with a program called O.M.I House here in Chicago, where I lived in community, served in the community, and I taught video production and sports broadcasting to an inner city charter school in Chicago, which was amazing, very fun. I then, before kind of entering the real world, did a few years of mission work. I did some independent, private things. I walked across the country with a friend of mine, and we made a documentary, and we gave talks all across the way to raise the awareness of the importance of prayer in our daily life. So we walked from Los Angeles to New Jersey. It took 5 months. We walked 3,562 miles, went through 9 pairs of shoes. Really, really fun and exciting. I spent a few years working for a Catholic adventure camp in Colorado called Camp Wojtyla, which is founded by 2 former Focus missionaries. And out there we had middle schoolers and high schoolers come out, do rock climbing, whitewater rafting, and then use that as a metaphor for our faith life and our faith journey, which was really amazing and fun. When I decided to, quote unquote, enter the real world of employment, my first job was at a parish here in the area near Mundelein. And I like to joke that I was the bulletin lady, but I was the communication coordinator. So I edited the bulletin, podcast homilies, managed websites, all that type of stuff. But it was kind of a big job because it was a fairly wealthy parish, and they had a 12-page bulletin that I had to edit every week. So there was enough for me to do there. And then I was there about 4 or 5 years before I made it to the Liturgical Institute, which I took the job here because I wanted to expand my skill set beyond just the neighborhood or city that my parish was part of, the geographical area. And the Liturgical Institute, it paid more money, and I had a kid on the way. And I said, I need that. But it also gave me access to an audience that was worldwide rather than hyper local. And so I got to really hone my marketing skills here. And so I started here about 6.5, 7 years ago as the assistant director of marketing, and had a lot of really great fun learning about the liturgy and engaging with the content that we were creating here. Really, my marketing strategy was just content creations. I knew that if we could just explain or create content, we could draw people in to learn about our brand. And then, lo and behold, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we had been quite a stretch, a few years without an actual formal director of the Institute. There had been a long search and a long interim period, and they asked me to do it, and I said no because I'm not a academic liturgiologist, and I do the marketing stuff. And they said, well, we really like all the stuff that you've done, and the video series, the podcasts, and all the digital content. we want that to continue, and we'll have the academic part. We'll have a director of intellectual formation, so the degree part of what we do can still exist. And so after a lot of convincing, I said yes. And so I've been doing the director job for a year and a half, 2 years. Absolutely love it. And really, quintessentially, kind of in my faith journey, I had two major reversions. One of them at that Camp Wojtyła with the counselors and things like that. And that's after my third summer there. That's where I was just like absolutely 1,000% yes to Jesus, and again, lived Catholic life, dated, ended up getting married, had a kid, and then started working at the Liturgical Institute. And the stuff that I've learned here overshadows anything really that I've learned in my faith journey. And to me, that's where the drive and the passion comes from, because I made it to 30 years old without knowing my role in the Mass. And I don't want that to happen to anybody else. And so I have this really perfect storm of passionate about my faith, but also I understand what it's like to learn this for the first time and how information can be approachable rather than just the document says this, so we have to do that, because that's not really what it's about at its core. But if we get the fundamentals right, then we can layer those things on top, and then we can start to really understand truly what it means to live a sacramental life. So in closing, working at the Liturgical Institute has fundamentally changed the way that I look at everything in this world. We are in a unreconciled world. It is reconciled through Christ, but we are in a broken world. But everything, time, creation, ourselves, our neighbors, can be reconciled principally through Jesus Christ. So that's the lens by which I look at the world now. That's the hermeneutic that I use, and it's life-changing. And so I want to share that with as many people as possible.
Yeah, what you described, on your own journey, and particularly of how, the deeper understanding and awareness, and and then of course your participation in the liturgy, how that has totally transformed your life, and your desire to share that with others is absolutely beautiful. I had kind of a similar experience in a different way of, not, directly with the liturgy, but in coming to an understanding of, I call them the 4 steps to holiness, of how it is that we are asked to become, living, breathing, wonder-working saints. And, those 4 steps are daily prayer and meditation. The second is, the sacraments, the Mass, participation in the Mass and living that life of grace in its fullness, striving to grow daily in virtue, and then abandoning ourselves to His will. And it's in the midst of that there's all these different layers of depth, and you just continue to go ever and ever deeper. But it's the knowing the basics of what we then are able to unfold for the rest of our lives that I'm passionate to tell people about, because that becomes the key for you to be able to do that journey. And, as I said, the Mass is so huge. And, I work with all ages, and particularly, in my parish. But then also I will mentor, because I'm a spiritual mentor. I will work with women, and they're different ages, and they're coming to an understanding of the Mass isn't something you go to be at. And when they begin to unwrap that mystery and unveil it for themselves is awesome. So, the fact that you're passionate about it. So how do you get connected then with your, I call them kind of your partners in crime, so Chris Carstens and Dr. Dennis McNamara?
Well, when I started here, they worked here actually. They were both faculty members at the Liturgical Institute, and Dennis only recently started working at Benedictine College. And in fact, despite not having him here anymore, and it was a big loss for the Liturgical Institute, in a real way, it hasn't really changed anything. I mean, he still teaches for us remotely.
Right.
We bring him out here for conferences. We still do the podcast. So essentially, we get the best of both worlds. We get to have that outreach of having somebody from the Liturgical Institute teaching at a college, and that certainly will help with recruiting things. But they were both faculty members when we started working here, And the story about the podcast, and for those of you who don't know,
Mhm.
our podcast is called the Liturgy Guys.
Mhm.
And we have our campus is on this beautiful campus in Mundelein, Illinois, 1,000 acres, woods, lakes, rivers, ponds, everything, and just gorgeous architecture. And the seminary is also on campus. So when we go to the refectory or the dining hall, sometimes we'll have lunch with other faculty or bishops or seminarians. And so there was a seminarian having lunch with Dennis, Chris, and myself, and he asked them something about noble simplicity. And then Dennis and Chris just started riffing off of each other, and Dennis would add something, then Chris would add something on top of that. And I'm sitting there like ping ponging this conversation, just saying, "Well, this should be recorded. The world needs to hear this conversation." So Dennis was on board pretty much right away. Chris at the time didn't even know what a podcast was, but I was just like, "Just do it. It will be good." And so
Mhm.
I remember after the first month, I went into Dennis's office and I said, "Hey, we got 50 downloads for our podcast." I'm so excited. Now
Mhm.
we're getting 5, 6, 7,000 downloads an episode for our
Mhm.
podcast. And the way I like to see it is that liturgy is a difficult thing to talk about, both from, political, type of
Mhm.
spectrum. It can be very divisive, but also people think it's boring. They think it's just a bunch of rules and things like that. So
Mhm.
you really have to make it approachable and interesting. So my job on the show is to be comedic relief and to be the everyman. And so when they say things like epiclesis, I have to say, "Hey, wait a minute. Could you just tell? I mean, can you tell us what an epiclesis is?" I know that stuff now. And in fact, in season
Mhm.
6, it is harder to do that because I know a lot of the stuff that they're
Right.
talking about.
Mhm.
But man, between that and a video series I did with the former director called Elements of the Catholic Mass, those are very foundational in my
Mhm.
understanding of liturgy as it is today. And so it puts me in a very unique situation in which I am daily conversing with academics about liturgical approaches and studies and things like that. But I am the everyman. I am just this dude with a BA in communications. And so I can communicate with families and people in the pew. And I can kind of be a conduit both ways, you know?
Mhm.
And so it's afforded me the ability to really play a pivotal role in liturgical conversations. And so that's another big blessing from all of this.
Oh, that is a huge blessing. Just as an aside, Elements of the Catholic Mass, I believe, is available on Formed. If someone if their parish has Formed, you're able to catch it. So
I forgot about that actually.
yeah. So, that's actually how I came across it, and,
Oh,
it's
great.
it's beautiful work, so thank you for that. And it's something where so often we will slip into the language of, theological ease without even realizing it. And so I am in the coordinator for parish ministries in a rural Alabama, parish that has made the transition that the majority of America is going to be doing in the next 10, 15 years, which is we went from predominantly English speaking Anglo community to predominantly
Latin.
well, actually, you'll love this. You'll love this. So we're predominantly Hispanic now, but you'll love this. We've used the Latin responses as a way to bring the community together,
Yeah.
so that way everybody, quote, is having to learn a different language.
I've
But
been saying that for years. That's the best way to get people to understand the universal church. And then what's more, when you go to Rome and you hear them saying, the Pater Noster, like you actually know what's happening. It might be the only part of the mass you actually know what's happening.
exactly, exactly. But all the more reason why I become aware of when I'll talk theologicalese, and partially that's because my Spanish isn't good enough to use the bigger words. So therefore it's like, okay, how do I share this concept in littler words? And then that makes me aware of the fact I'm using stuff that I probably shouldn't be using.
Es
And
muy importante.
exactamente. So it's really, really key. You guys talk about the fact that the Liturgy Guys, mission is to share the treasures of the liturgy with English-speaking Catholics all around the world. Why do you believe it's important to do this?
Because most people don't know what the mass is actually about. The Catechism says the two ends of the Mass are the glorification of God and the sanctification of mankind. We do and understand that first part pretty well, I would say, as a whole. That second part, I believe we only get partial credit for, and that's even some of the time people say that's the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. But it's not just Christ in the Eucharist, it's your offering and it's yourself. And so the way I'd like to explain it to people, and this is quintessential. You cannot talk about church documents unless you do this first, which is, if you're at Mass, you are a victim on the altar. You offer yourself in the chalice on the pat, so that when the elements become Christ, so too you become Christ. And you are Christified, deified, sanctified, transfigured. And the culmination of this whole experience at the Mass is when you consume or eat your own perfection, again, becoming Christified, deified, sanctified. And what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says is that it's the purpose of the Mass is to glorify God, again, we understand that, and sanctify mankind. So that means that it's not actually just me putting myself on the altar. It means that I can be a pivotal player in the mystical body of Christ, where I am then sanctifying mankind, which means when I leave that church, I not only become holy myself, but I can confer holiness. Like the Israelites believed, when you're in the presence of God, the Holy of Holies, you became holy and conferred holiness. So I go out in the streets and I now have an interaction with you. I can now confer holiness to you. I can sanctify, like I said, creation, time, people around me. The really, really dumbed down metaphor that I like to use is, you imagine a potato in an oven, right? And if we do the Mass, the very basic valid parts of the Mass, it's like turning that oven to like 150 degrees, still valid, still warm. But when you do all these things and you give yourselves an opportunity for more grace in the Mass by using antiphons or proper language or music or, incense or progressive solemnity, every time you do something like that, it gets that oven a little bit hotter, so that when you leave, you become hot, you confer heat. So when you confer that grace to people beyond, it's more efficacious. And then, of course, beyond that, you mentioned this daily prayer, all this devotions, things. Those are all like mini masses. There's many ways to sanctify and to like get more heat. But none of it is as important as the Mass itself.
Right. Now, and that is, what the language that you've just been sharing. I know a lot of people kind of go, "Oh, wait a minute, isn't that making me, God?" And it's just like, the language sometimes will be off-putting, and I run into that because when I speak about, becoming saints, people are like, "Oh my gosh, no, I can't be a saint." And it's like, no, you were created to be a unique and unrepeatable saint, of God's image. It's like the big prism. It's just like, change it and, you look different and then I look different. And we're supposed to do that to glorify God. But it's through our divinization. It's through
Absolutely.
our piece by piece. And that's why John the Baptist, who of course we, ran into again this last weekend with the baptism of our Lord, is the fact of, I must decrease, he must increase. And the only way that can happen is for us to be constantly coming before and saying, "Hey, change this fingernail. Okay, now let's change the finger. No, let's do the hand." But we don't look at it that way. We look at it as, "Oh, I receive them, and then pretty much it's dead." And we wonder why, we don't see signs of holiness walking, living, and breathing, among us. And it's because we don't understand what is going on. And when we don't understand it, and we're never going to fully understand it, of course, but if we don't even begin to grasp at what the process is, then it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's a lukewarm interpretation of what's happening, and we all know what happens to the lukewarm, as Christ said.
Yeah.
But at the Liturgical Institute, I'm very proud to declare, part of what I want to do here is top down, bottom up, right? So we have graduate degrees in liturgical theology, and we're probably one of the most prestigious liturgical degrees in the country, if not the world. And so we are teaching the teachers who teach seminaries and seminarians, right, through our STL program. But we are also using our programming like our podcast and our video series and online classes to help educate the laity. So our goal is to have a parish one day with people who are learning about the liturgy from us in the pews, but maybe their pastor went to a seminary and learned about sacramental theology from one of our other graduates, right? So we're trying to scattershot and get as much as we can so that we can start with that foundational principle, and then you can start add some of these really mystical things about the mass.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And it's the process that, Jesus took. I mean, it's not like he didn't speak to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the leaders, of the church of his day. Um, you know, but it was something of where he spoke to the people. But what was he doing? He was training the trainers, as we talk about it in the military, of where it's just like, okay, you guys are going to really get it. And then I'm going to send you out, and then you're going to do the same for others. And it's absolutely brilliant. So thank you for all of that work. Just as an aside, because I'm a huge reader, and many times people will say, well, what's it kind of like a primer that I could read where I can come to understand like what you were just expressing, and what we were talking about. How can I come to that understanding? What would be a really good thing, book for somebody to read, or a video series that you would recommend to be able to grow in that?
Well, certainly we have a lot at the Liturgical Institute. So Elements of the Catholic Mass is a really good short video series you can watch totally free. Everything's around a 5-minute clip, explains different parts about the Mass.
Mhm.
But if you're reading something, some of the really important things you should read are the documents of Sacrosanctum Concilium from Vatican II, right? That's an incredibly important document. I would also, if you're serious about this, and all Catholics should be about the Mass, read the general instruction of the Roman Missal, not
Mhm.
just from a formality to understand like what's happening, but there's some really deep richness in there. There's prenotandas that explain what's about to happen. Prenotanda is just like the notes beforehand. And actually, in our podcast right now, we're walking through the general instruction of the Roman Missal. Last year or the year before, we walked through Sacrosanctum Concilium, paragraph by paragraph. We even last year also talked about everything the Catechism said about liturgy, which is incredibly important as well. There's tons of liturgical documents. Another important book would be Spirit of Liturgy by Romano Guardini, which I think is really
Mm.
good. And then, of course, you could read Benedict XVI's Ratzinger's version of Spirit of Liturgy, which is really great.
Mhm.
And, our podcast own Chris Carson's has a really, really approachable book on the Mass, A Devotional Journey Through the Mass by Chris
Mhm.
Carson's. Really, really good. And if you do that stuff or you kind of have a hankering for more, we have over 125 hours of content in our online school. You just go to liturgy.online. So,
Liturgy.online.
and
Awesome.
there's a free class there by Chris, an introduction to sacred liturgy. We have it in English and Spanish, actually. The Spanish version's just on YouTube for free for anybody to watch, and you can register for the free class at that website.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. Because right now we're just going through just a very basic series of talking about the different parts of the Mass. We haven't even broken down, we've talked about the
Mhm.
elements, but in the context of it's in the liturgy of the word, for example. And so it's kind of like starting and then trying to go a little bit deeper. And there's a desire for more,
Mhm.
and that's always beautiful to see that. So I'm gonna ask the question because I've got lots of parents out there with kids, and they're coming to to the Mass, and what might be some practical suggestions that you could give them so that they can come and be implementing the teachings of the Church on liturgy as they're worshiping as a family.
Mhm. So I have 4 young children myself, and these are some of the things that I do with my children. It's just, even though none of them are old enough to receive the Eucharist yet, I want them to get to understand what's happening on the mat at the Mass. So anytime the preparation of gifts happen, as the wine is being poured in the chalice and the paten is being elevated, my kids, everybody grabs their heart. Visibly
Mhm.
grab their heart. We all look around. We say, "Everybody ready?" And then we throw our hearts onto the altar, in the chalice, and on the paten.
Mhm.
And that's a way for them, this is not an official posture or gesture in the general instruction of
Right.
the Roman Missal, but it's a personal act of piety that I can get my kids to understand, like, oh, okay, stop what you're doing. This is really important. Grab your heart, throw it on the altar, right? That's one thing. Another thing is kind of, getting the children to understand those gestures and postures and reverence, right? So, one of the really cool things you can do with folded hands, they can get really tired easy folding their hands, but if you give them something to think about, especially with young boys, I find this really works.
Mhm.
Uh, but you fold your hands, and really what you do is you're telling them you're pointing your hands to Jesus. And
Mm.
so I told my son Isaac this when he was 3 years old, and then I saw him doing this with his hands. He was just like pew 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 pew, So he's just pointing at different things like he's shooting a Nerf gun or something. But
Mm.
in his mind, that's
Mm.
orienting. Okay, like I'm orienting or pointing, and so they're very young still, and none of them are receiving the Eucharist yet or reconciliation or anything. But we're getting to that point where they can start to look at that. Then, those are the foundations, right? Sanctify,
Right.
glorify God, sanctify mankind. Aim yourself towards God for praise and glory, and then
Mhm.
sanctify yourself by putting yourself on the altar. Now they're not a part of the Eucharistic prayer in terms of the culmination and reception of the Eucharist, but they are an integral part of the mystical body of Christ, and I don't want that to be lost on them, right? That's incredibly important.
Mhm.
So my job as their father and my wife's job as their mother is to offer them on the altar for them,
Mm.
just like we baptized for them, right? We said
Right.
yes for them. And so that's a way where we can participate together in that sacred mystery.
That's so beautiful. So many people are so unaware of the power that has been entrusted to them, and how it is that they can intercede for
Mhm,
their loved ones. And so, absolutely beautiful suggestions. Thank you so much. Just a couple. Our time's starting to get
mhm.
a little short, but I did want to ask on a personal level. How do you think your work has helped you on your journey towards becoming a saint? Mhm.
Oh, that is very easy to see. One of the things that connected with me right away was music.
Mm,
And I'll ask you, the church has in multiple documents in Vatican II and all the way back to 1903 in Charles Lecitudini has mentioned that there's a hierarchy of things to be sung in the mass. So I'll ask you, I don't want to put you on the spot, and
it's okay.
but what do you think the church says is the most important thing that we should sing in mass?
That we should sing at the mass?
Yeah.
Yeah, my thought would be that it would be the Our Father, but
Okay.
that's, but you rarely come across that, so I'm pretty sure that that wouldn't be the case, but rather would be our responses.
So the Our Father is number 3, and you're close with the first one. It's anything that's a dialogue between the priest and the people or a liturgical minister and the people.
Mhm.
And that shocked me because we never do that in the States. We always go backwards. So number 4 is any other hymn. So music directors in parishes here, they always start with what's the readings, here's the
Mhm.
hymn that matches the readings, and then here's the mass part, and almost never the propers, which are the antiphons and things like that. We almost never do that. And then like pretty much 0% chanting the dialogues, right? Okay, so we
Mhm.
have that foundation. Now we're adding layers to this, right? And there's a point to all of this, but let's take one of those things. Why does the church say dialogues are important? Well, it's because we're enjoining in this Trinitarian love song, right?
Mhm.
Sung prayer is elevated prayer. Elevated prayer is exemplified in the Trinity. And so we're mirroring this, perichoresis and dialogue from the Trinity. And here's why that's really cool. Because let's take the readings. There is a chant tone for every reading in the liturgy.
Mhm.
Let's take a
Yeah.
Sunday where we have something from the Old Testament and the New Testament. You chant the introduction to the Old Testament, the introduction goes down a fifth. The lector would say, our reading from the book of Genesis, it goes down a fifth. The New Testament, we have the revealed Christ, so it goes down a third. So instead of a fifth, we are closer. The notes are literally closer in pitch. So you
Mhm.
say a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Philippians, you go down a third, and at the end you say the word of the Lord. We all say thanks be to God. The gospel does something totally different. It descends and ascends. So you say a reading from the Holy Gospel according to descends, Mark ascends. So we are mirroring with our voice gospel of descent,
Mhm.
incarnation, the word incarnate, literally the word, mark,
Mhm.
ascension, resurrection, transfiguration, sanctification. And so when we start connecting these things, it's like, boom, I'm plugging another thing in this infinite outlet of grace so that
Mm.
I can then take that as a part of my life and then go sanctify them and recharge my liturgical and sacramental battery, so to speak. And so it's important that we're finding these ways to connect because that's how we keep things going.
Mhm.
And again, with I see it with my children. My son goes to this really great Catholic school, and I yelled at him one time, and he said, "Daddy, don't yell at me. That's not being an image of God." I said, "Oh my God!" I like literally took a step back, and then of course I responded, "Hey Isaac, do you know what righteous anger is?" And then I tried to explain that to him, calmed him down a bit.
Mhm.
But they are really receptive to this. We were quarantined because I had COVID over Christmas, and so we had to do television mass. And so we're getting the TV ready, the mass starts, and my 2-year-old daughter Zelly runs over to our little oratory altar and grabs a fistful of rosaries and starts passing them out to people. Because in her mind, she's understanding there's a sign and symbol here.
Mhm.
Something sacred is happening. And this is what we do. This is how we respond. So principally, I see that in my own life, but
Mhm.
I love to see that spread to my children and my wife and those that I encounter in the world.
Ah, beautiful. And thank you for that short lesson. I was involved in music ministry, for many years and but had never had the opportunity to sing the antiphons and the responses. And so did not know about the fifths and the thirds. And that is
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Talk about encouragement for people to be open to
Mhm.
potentially, learning how to actually do this as
And
cantors.
that's just a little bit of dust off of this stone, this beautiful
Yeah.
gem that we have. And so you can continue to take that off layer by layer and really see what's revealed to us. And
Mhm.
boy, there's so much there. And so that's our job. We got to get everybody to understand all of it because the people who led up to Vatican II, the figures of the liturgical movement, they inherently believed that if every world leader offered themselves on the altar and sanctified the world, we would live in a peaceful world. They believed that we would have no race relation issues. We would have no Great Depression, no economic downfalls. They believed inherently, which is true, that that is the source to sanctify the world. Just we're
Mhm.
not enough of us are doing that right now. And so we really need to make sure that people understand.
Absolutely. Well, good resolutions, especially as we're beginning another calendar year. Just as an aside, what's your favorite book, movie, or TV show? In
Oh, just in general? And
Yeah.
man, that's a good question. Well, actually, my favorite movie is October Sky with Jake
Ah,
Gyllenhaal and
yes.
Chris Cooper, I think is the dad.
Mm-hmm.
We watched this and I always loved the movie. I built model rockets when I was a kid. I absolutely loved it. I loved hands-on learning like that. But in high school, we took a class about fatherhood, and then we watched that movie. And man, especially with my own father, maybe not
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to express some of those things himself, but I just really connected, and I just absolutely loved it. It's a good story.
Oh, it is. It's a phenomenal story, and you bring up the reality that it's story that speaks to us.
Mhm,
And at the liturgy, the greatest story ever told is spoken and shared over and over again. So absolutely
mhm.
beautiful. So one last kind of fun question for you, but if you were to go back in time and share one piece of advice with your younger self, what would it be?
I would absolutely tell myself, hey, you can do whatever you want. You're going to figure out all this stuff along the way, and you're going to have these encounters with Christ. But principally,
Mhm.
this is what the Mass is glorification of God and sanctification of mankind. Put
Yeah.
yourself on the altar because there is no sense wasting any time not doing that. So once you know that, that type of stuff sticks with you for the rest of your life. That's the number one thing.
Oh, no, awesome. So, I'll probably go ahead, and that will be the title for this podcast post will be "Put Yourself on the Altar."
Mhm,
Conversation with Jesse Weiler, the Liturgy Guys. So
mhm,
thank you so much, Jesse. This has been very illuminating for me, and enjoyable and inspirational, and very encouraging because now, even when I might not know exactly what's going on, I know where I can go find where I
mhm,
can learn about it. But then also knowing that there's ever more deeper meaning and purpose to what it is that we're about. So it's not just, ritual and just moving up and down, but rather
mhm,
an opportunity to truly be, in the words of Vatican II, fully conscious
mhm.
and actively participating. So thank you again so much. So for everybody, one more time, if you would share your website and where people can find out information about you, as well as the courses that you made mention of.
So you can find anything at liturgicalinstitute.org, and I really highly recommend taking classes in our online program where you can go to www.liturgy.online.
All right. Well, super. Well, thank you again. And for everyone who's been listening out there, you now have a resolution to
Mhm,
go and to truly be able to enter more deeply into the Mass the next time that you are there, and to help others who you love be able to do that the same. So let us continue to do whatever it takes so that we can tell the Master of Death, not today. Have a blessed day, everybody.